All right, good evening, fellow historians, and welcome to our January Maryland History Day office hour. My name is Leah Atnat. In my job, I travel all over our state and I visit students like you guys and I visit teachers and I make sure everyone has everything they need to do an awesome History Day project. So I'm here tonight to do the same. I'm here to answer any questions you might have for any point in the History Day project. So if you would like to ask a question, there is a link to a Google form in the YouTube description below. So click through on that. You can ask your questions. If you want to shout out, you can share your name. And if you like, you can tell us what county you're coming from, because we like to know that too. So let's see. The topic of today's office hour is going to be the finishing touches of your History Day project. We are now in mid-January, almost late January. So I know a lot of you are even already done with your History Day projects, but a lot of you are still working on them. But the projects are coming to a close soon. And I know that some of you are prepping and planning and hoping to make it to your district contests. So I'm going to give you a few tips for how to put the finishing touches on your projects, how to wrap them up, and hopefully make them contest ready and ready to submit to your teachers. If you haven't attended before, the format is sort of back and forth between me giving tips and then answering your questions. And you can ask a question at any time. And let's see, this is our, I think, 4th or 5th recording of the year. So if you're interested in any other topics from other points of the project, you are welcome to go back into our archive and watch some of our old office hour videos. And this one will be recorded as well for anyone who can't make it. All right, so thanks again for being here. I'm going to go ahead and get started with some tips for you guys. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to talk about, we're at this phase where you're about to turn in your project or maybe even have it be viewed by judges. So you might be thinking about what kinds of feedback you might get. So I wanted to share with you guys some of the top critiques that I see from judges and from teachers about Students' History Day project. And what I'm going to do is just share these with you guys, and then throughout the rest of the evening, we'll try to answer some of them. Then we'll come back to the list at the end, make sure we checked all of them off. So some of the critiques that I see a lot about History Day projects are that they're missing proper citations for images and video clips. That's a big one, and it's really important. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. That it's missing a connection to the theme. We all know that the theme this year is Frontiers in History, and we want to see that theme made explicit, not just implicit. You might know that there's a great connection. We might assume that there's a great connection, but we want to see you making that analysis. I see judges saying that the thesis needs to be either clearer or stronger. You might need broader research or more reliable sources. So maybe you only have a small selection of primary sources. Maybe your secondary sources are from questionable sites. You want to make sure you get them from those trusted sources, universities, government sources, libraries, archives. And then another thing that I see sometimes is that the project doesn't connect all the dots. So in other words, you might sort of list a few different events, but not really talk about how they connect. How did one thing lead to the next? And sometimes it's up to you to make that analysis of how two events fit together. Okay, so these are some of the most common critiques that I see. If your teacher has already given you some feedback like this, hopefully throughout this evening, we'll be able to give you some solutions for how to improve these things in your own project. Okay, so on to my first tip for the night. My first tip is to go back over your project and use the NHD judging rubrics as a checklist. And make sure you have everything covered. So check the rules, first of all. As you guys all know, there are rules about things like word counts or the length of a documentary or performance, the length of audio and video clips and other media. So you will want to check your own word count, check the length of the media you include, check for image credits, check for the credits in your documentary. Make sure everything follows what it says in the rule book. And where can you find those rules? Really easy place, easy to remember, nhd.org/rules. And you can also find the judging rubric criteria at nhd.org/evals, EVALS, as in short for evaluations. So I'm going to hop out and just show you how to locate that in the web browser. So give me just 1 second. Okay, so first one, nhd.org/rules, very easy to remember, takes you right to the rule book. I know it's long, but you can use the table of contents to find anything you need to. You can even do Control F and find the topic that you're looking for. So say I'm looking for citations. I'm sure it's going to come up in a lot of different spots, 18 different places, but I can use those to find exactly what I'm looking for. Okay. So that is the rule book. And again, it's a big book. I can find that, I can use that tool to find the category that I'm working on. If I'm doing a documentary, for example, I can easily find the section on documentaries. I just move down the list a little bit. And there we go. We've got the main heading on the documentary. Okay. And then the other thing that I wanted to share was evaluations. So that's at nhd.org/evals. And here they've got the evaluation sheets for all 5 categories merged together. So you can see this first one is for the documentary. And you might already know that each judging rubric is double-sided, so it's going to be 2 pages. So those first 2 pages are for the documentary. And then we see the paper and so on. And you might also know that this first page, this first section on historical quality is the same for all 5 projects. And as you can see, it is worth 80% of the total judging consideration. So we know that this section is the most important part of your project. The visuals, the technological aspects, those are all great, but they're really secondary to telling a good story, having good analysis, using great sources and using them well. So this is the part that I really want you guys to focus on, the historical quality. And it's not just accuracy, it's all those things that I just mentioned, having a consistent argument. These are all extremely important. So we can see some of these things coming up that we saw in our common critiques. So for example, the theme, again, we already know there are tons of topics that can fit the theme really well. Anything about the American West or space exploration or immigration, those all fit in really seamlessly with the theme of frontiers. But the thing is, we want to see the word frontier, absolutely, because we want to look at a project from this year and automatically know what year it was from and say, oh yeah, that was the year that it was frontiers in history. That was 2023. So we want to see you using that word. We want to see you making the analysis that brings together your topic and the word frontiers. How is your topic a frontier? Is it a frontier because it's a new geographical space that people are moving into? Is it a new technology or new scientific discovery? These are all examples of how something can be a frontier, but it's up to you to explain it. Another thing that I mentioned was having wide research. So I know you've already put so much into this project. I know that you feel like you're almost done, but you might get some feedback that says, I'd like to see a few more primary sources. And what I see on a lot of projects is for students who are doing a very visual project, like maybe an exhibit, maybe a documentary, and I look at their bibliographies, and the only primary sources that they list are the images on their board or the video clips in their documentary. And the thing is, images are great. Images are what's going to illustrate it, but images are not enough to tell the whole story. We want to see that you guys have done some reading too, and some digging into different types of primary sources to tell that story. One type that I always like to suggest is newspaper articles, because it's really easy to search for them in the Chronicling America website database. They are short, they're easy to read, it's not a whole book, and they're usually pretty accessible. So yeah, I'm all for the newspaper articles, but there are many different types of primary sources that are text-based, that have words that are going to tell you a little bit more in different formats. Okay. So have a look at this, use it as a checklist, make sure that you fall into the exemplary category for all of these things. And then when you scroll down, you can see the clarity of presentation section, which is where the audio visuals fall, the writing, which is another critique that I see sometimes. I wish the student had proofread this work. That's important too. It's not as important as the historical part, but it's still really important to learn to express yourself clearly, learn to use some of the spelling and grammar tools that are in Google Docs or in your word processor or whatever you're using. Okay, that's one tip. Use the checklist. All right, going back to my PowerPoint. So that's what this slide is. And then I wanted to talk really briefly again about the image credits, because they're so important. And I see so many students who forget about them, maybe until the last minute. Image credits are important because that's a way of showing our work. That's a way of avoiding plagiarism. Again, if we don't cite everything properly, it's counted as plagiarism. So in our image credits, this is for an exhibit or a website. You want to have a really brief, factual image credit. So you can see this first line here where it says Alice Paul, 1918, Library of Congress. That's all you need, and that does not count toward your word limit. Alice Paul in this case is the title of the image, or if your image didn't have a title, if this image didn't have a title, you might just use whatever the picture is of as the title, in this case, Alice Paul, the year it was created, and then who owns the rights to it. So in this case, it's the Library of Congress. Underneath that, you'll see a caption, and the caption is student written. And so the caption does count toward the word limit. And that is giving us some extra information. I wanted to also mention end credits for documentaries, because this is another thing that there's a lot of confusion around it, because there's not any one single way that it needs to look. It's up to you how you want to format it. It's up to you how you want to list things. but it is important that it is there, and it's important that you list whoever produced or owns the rights to all of the images and video clips that you show in your video. So here you can see they list Distant Shore, African Americans at D-Day. Looks like that is probably a documentary that they borrowed clips from. Saving Private Ryan is a film that they borrowed clips from. And then the images come from Library of Congress and the World War II Museum. So those are the organizations that hold the rights to those images. If you use clips from YouTube, YouTube does not own the rights to, I don't think, any of the material that they have up there. So you will want to find out which organization owns the rights. So it might be a news company. It might be a department of the government, like the Library of Congress, for example. It might be another kind of company. It might be an individual. So it's up to you to find that out. And I've got another example here. And you can see in this one sort of the variety of places that their materials come from. So we've got archives, we see a couple bibliotheques, and that means library. We see a university, Boston College. So these are the kinds of places that you'll want to credit in your documentary end credits. Okay, it's a lot of info. I'm going to pause there for a second and see if you guys have any questions. All right. So no questions yet. So I'm going to keep on going, and I'm gonna go straight through if I don't get any tonight. That's all right. Okay. So my next tip for you guys is about your process paper. So this is another part of the project that really comes at the end of the whole process. After you do everything else, after you do all your research, your writing, and put it all together, then you're going to reflect back on the work that you did. Here I have the selection about the process paper from the rule book. And so it goes over those elements that they want you to have, those 5 questions that they want you to answer. So how did you choose your topic, and how does it relate to the theme? How did you conduct your research? How did you create your project? What's your historical argument? And in what ways is your topic significant in history? This process paper should be in paragraph form, not bullet points. So you're going to write in complete sentences. I think you would probably have about a paragraph for each of these. Maybe you would combine these last 2 and have 4 paragraphs. That sounds like a good amount to me. Again, the word limit is 500 words, so it's going to come out to about 2 pages double spaced, not super long. And my tips about the process paper, first, so that you know why the process paper exists, this is where the judges look to understand your research process. Again, it's a way of showing your work. How do the judges know that this work is your own? Because you can explain for yourself how you got to that conclusion, how you got to that end result. So you might think about explaining things like what libraries and archives you looked into, what museums you went to, what was your process of research like? And this is a way of showing that you did the work yourself. Which sources and collections helped you the most? What part of your research are you most proud of? That's another thing that you might put in here. This part is, it's really free for you to talk a little bit more about the work that you did, not the information that you discovered, but your own process and your own feelings about what you accomplished. And it's also a place where you can let your personality come through. So this is the part of the project that can be and should be in first person. You will be writing I statements, or my group and I, and it's okay to to talk about your own thoughts through this process. Was it difficult for you? Why is the topic especially important for you? Do you have a personal connection to it? That's, again, the sort of thing that's going to tell the judges and the teachers, that this work is your own, that this work is something that's meant a lot to you. So really let those thoughts guide you while you're answering those questions that are in the rule book. Okay, so that's my tip about the process paper. Again, gonna pause, see if there are any questions. Actually, I do wanna, one question. How to format adding in a quote? Ooh, good question. So that's something that I wanted to share with you guys tonight. So let's see. How to format adding in a quote. So it depends on what kind of project you're doing. If you are writing a paper, for example, you're going to add your quote in, and then you've chosen either to use MLA citation style or Chicago citation style. I prefer Chicago personally. A lot of people prefer MLA. In Chicago style, you'll be using formats to cite your quote. And you will put the citation at the bottom of the page, and the word processor you're using will do that for you. If you're doing MLA, you'll have a parenthetical citation. So you'll have the author's name in parentheses next to it. If you are doing an exhibit or a website, you don't need to cite the quotation in the text. You'll just make sure to put in your bibliography the full citation for it, and you can even mention in your annotation that you pulled a quote from it. If you're asking about formatting it, like where to put it on the page, some quotes might work better in the text of your website or exhibit. Some of them might work better pulled out as a block quote. If you are asking more specifically about the citation itself, this is something that I wanted to talk about. So for citations, the best tool that I know is the Purdue Online Writing Lab. And you can get to it at OWL, like the bird, owl.purdue.edu. But in this case, OWL stands for Online Writing Lab. And I'm going to click through again on Online Writing Lab, but you could use any of these quick guides as well. And since I know a lot of people like MLA, I'll look for the MLA resources. So we see over on the left column menu here, a tab for research and citation. That's going to help us. And here we can see MLA style and Chicago style. Take a look at MLA style. And here we've got the MLA formatting and style guide. And this site is going to have how to write a bibliographical citation for any kind of source that you can think of, whether it's a book or a newspaper or magazine or another type of primary source. If it's a video or a website article or a quote from the Bible, anything you can think of, this guide will help you find a way to cite it. And they've got a sample here. Well, let's take a look. So we've got, here's the citation for books. And so they give you sort of a template for it with all of the information that you will fill in, like the author, the title, etc. They will also help you out and help you write that citation here And they will also have, okay, here's the basic book format, and they'll also have some examples for you, so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so this is an awesome tool for figuring out how to cite things, especially if there are things that are not so intuitive. Like, I think a lot of us learn how to cite books pretty early on, but others are sort of more unusual. Here's the one for electronic sources. So those web articles and things like that. And so they're talking about all the information that you should collect from that web page to put into your citation. And then you've got the format, how to cite an entire website, and then they've got some examples for you. So I know it looks like a lot when you look at all this information written out, but it's just because they have these long descriptions of what each thing is. And then here's what the actual citation might look like. All right, so it's not too hard, but you want to make sure you do it right. I've looked over some projects already, and I've seen some bibliographies with information missing. So you want to make sure you have that attention to detail to have all the information you need. Okay, and then as for the citation, or the annotations rather, might have mentioned this before, but the annotations are usually around 2 sentences, not longer than 2. Well, not longer than 3, but I would say ideally 2. And it should be a sentence that briefly summarizes the source, and a sentence that tells us how you used that source. So how was it useful in learning more about your topic? How did you use it in your project? Things like that. Okay, great. I've got another question. Octavia, hi Octavia. She asks, how do they choose who goes on to county level for NHD? I would really love to move past statewide and any special eye grabbers for judges. Okay, so for county level, that really depends on the school, because it's going from school to county to state to national. At the school level, a lot of schools do things different ways. So some will have a formal contest, much like the state contest, where they get a lot of volunteer judges. They hold interviews with the students and fill out ranking sheets and judging sheets, and that's how they decide. At other schools, teachers will decide who moves on to the county contest. So it's different everywhere. But the most important things for moving to county are making sure that you follow all of the criteria for doing an excellent project. So looking at those judging rubrics, making sure you meet all of the historical quality criteria and do your best for clarity of presentation. That's what's going to be most important. As far as special eye grabbers for the judges, that's really hard. It's really hard to say. I think it's eye-grabbing to do a really excellent job historically, because as I've said, the visual aspects are really secondary. If you spend all your time making a really flashy exhibit board with, lights and cutouts and flip books and all sorts of other things and artifacts, but you neglect other areas of your project, like making sure your argument is consistent, then you're not going to be as successful as if you spent more time developing your argument and less time with the extras. Okay, so that's the best I can say. It's hard to think about eye grabbers because well, they do appeal to a lot of people and a lot of judges, but we really want students to think about how they can move forward based on their historical merit first. If you meet all of those criteria, if you feel like you're in a good place with with all of the judging criteria, at that point, you might think about how to boost the visuals of your project a little bit. But just know that that's going to be secondary. All right, good luck. All right, anything else for now? Okay, cool. Going back to my PowerPoint, I think I got one more thing to share. Okay, yes. So my last tip for you guys is to reread or rewatch your work, which is not always fun to have to go through everything again. But I want to challenge you to reread it as if you are a judge or a teacher and as if you are seeing it for the first time. So this is going to be the way that you pick up on the things that you miss. Because right now you've done so much research, you know so much about your topic, and your mind is filling in all the gaps for you. But if you reread it as if you don't know anything about the topic at all, you'll have to think, okay, is my reader going to understand when I go from this topic to this topic, or do I need to connect them a little bit more, connect those dots a little bit more? So think those things through. When you read it as if you are a judge or teacher, you'll want to think about whether or not it flows well, whether or not it makes sense. Does the order that you tell the story make sense? Does the presentation of it make sense? It might make sense to you, again, where you are with all the information that you have. But another reader might need extra information. They might need a different presentation that lends better to the flow of the story. So think about those things. Do you make a strong argument? So again, you'll want to go back to your thesis statement. Think about your thesis statement as the central organizing component of the whole project. And when you read it that way, and you read each section, and then after each section, you think back to your thesis statement and think, okay, is this helping me achieve the goal of arguing my thesis? Or is it just a distraction? Is it just sort of like a side element? Again, your thesis is usually going to be based on why your event is significant in history. So if you are sort of telling a side story or something that is not directly related to your central event, you might need to take it out, depending on the word count, depending on how well it supports the rest of the story. You just want to make sure that you follow through with that argument and everything supports it. Is anything missing? Again, do all the dots connect? Is there any information that would be important to someone reading it for the first time that seems to be left out? And so in doing this, you might make a reverse outline, and that'll help you keep track. So as you reread over things, or as you watch your own performance, watch your own documentary, you might just jot down, okay, what's happening at this point? Okay, here I'm talking about the context. And then here I'm talking about, excuse me, the main event. Here I'm talking about the short-term impacts, and just make sure you have all those components that you plan to have from the beginning. Okay, and then you can match it up and see if that's what your original outline had looked like. Is everything still there after you made all your edits and changes to it? Okay. And I wanted to share, actually, I'll pause a minute, see if there are any questions, and I wanted to share one more little resource. Any questions? Okay. I'll share one resource for now, and then I'll see if there's another question or two. But I'm going to hop over to my web browser again. And I'm going to nhd.org. And I've probably even showed this to you guys before. But I'm hovering over for students, and then I'm going to project examples. And I've showed you guys that you can find other student NHD projects, both at the national level and students from Maryland at the state and national level. But now that you're at a different point in your project, because I show them from the beginning to sort of give some inspiration for different topics you might choose, different ways to present information. But at this point, you're done with the research, you have your topic and everything. So now you might look at other students' work to pick up some tips from other students for how to do really good work. So here in the student sample section, you can find student samples from past years. You can find not only the project itself, it says watch documentary, but also the process paper and bibliography. So these are all students who went to the national contest. If you want to see what a nationals level project looks like, and here we've got a first place senior individual documentary, we know that that's going to be high quality work. I can click through and let's take a look at her bibliography. So here's her process paper. And here's her bibliography. So we can see, that she was really diligent about having proper citations in the proper, MLA style. We can see that her annotations here are really thorough. They don't have to be super long, you can see, but they're going to tell us what she got out of each source. And those annotations are important along the way of the project because you're going to go back to those and see what you thought about them and what analyses you made while you were reading them, and then borrow those analyses for your project. Okay, so examples of excellent student work, and of course we can watch the documentary as well, and pick up any tips that we can from that, whether it's different types of transitions to use, or what a good type of end credit looks like, or anything like that. So I recommend that you look at other students' work online for inspiration and for tips. Okay. All right, any final questions for the evening? Okay, I'm going to go back. I told you I would return to this. Okay, so the common critiques that I showed you at the beginning, you can just go over them one more time to make sure we covered everything. So we talked about how to make sure we have proper citations for images and video clips. You always want to have an image credit, whether you are doing an exhibit, website, or even a paper if you have images in your appendix. And for your documentary, you want to have that end credit page. Remember, the end credits don't need to be your full bibliography. It's just a list of organizations who own the rights. So Library of Congress, New York Times, CBS News, whatever it is. But it's got to be there. Next, about the theme, we talked about that, making the connection really explicit, using the theme word. That's important. The thesis. I see a lot that the thesis needs to be clearer or stronger. There's something that I don't think I talked about this too much. So I will say that this one comes out especially in documentaries and performances. It's tough, and it's because it's not written down where we can see it. For exhibits and websites, students usually have the thesis set aside in its own little text box. They might even have the heading thesis there. That's always useful for pointing out exactly what the thesis is if they want to show us. But in documentaries and in performances, the thesis might be just sort of mixed in with all the other dialogue or narration that's happening. So it's really got to stand out so that the listener gets it on the first go through. What I like to see in documentaries is a good pause after the thesis to let it sink in, to let the viewer really understand and say, oh, okay, they just said something important, and now I've got to process this for a second. I really like it, excuse me, when students put the title slide, the title page, right after the thesis statement, because then automatically it's going to pause for a second. We're going to process that we just heard the thesis. We're going to read the title page and then move on to, starting with the context and the buildup. With a performance, you got to get a little bit more creative because you might be in character. That's always really tough. I know at this point, you're at a point where your performance is probably done, but does your thesis stand out from everything else that you say? Maybe you could, again, find a way to pause for a moment after you say your thesis and make sure that it stands out. In other cases, when I'm talking about being clearer or stronger, I'm also talking about making sure you give concrete reasons why your topic is important. And again, all of you are talking about significance and history. So I really want to see impacts in there, concrete impacts, not just this event was revolutionary, but this event was revolutionary because it caused this and this and this. So give those concrete results, those concrete impacts to have a really strong thesis. We talked about having wide research, making sure we go to reliable sources, and you might even still be adding new sources at this point to round out your knowledge. And that's normal. And if you do make it to your local contests, know that you can keep on adding to your project between each level. If you are at the school level and you find out that you're going to your county contest, you might decide to find another source that's useful. And we talked about connecting all the dots, making sure that your analyses are what is connecting everything together. How did one thing lead to another? Okay, I got one more question in here. Hi, Austin. Austin asks, how should I improve my writing for the project in an argument way and make it stronger? Oops. Okay, so if you want to make sure that your writing is supporting your argument and making that argument strong, what you really want to do is make sure you have the evidence and the sources to support that argument. So it's not just about your writing itself, but it's also about being able to present evidence. So, saying I found this newspaper article that shows us that, people were unfriendly to immigrants, or that people tried to help immigrants, or that, they offered programs to help immigrants feel more at home. So what are you finding? How does it support the argument that you're making? Again, everything that you are looking at, you're making analyses in your mind of how it fits in and how it's helping support what you're saying. So it's up to you to make sure you write all that out and let your reader know what you're thinking about it. Don't let them come to any of the conclusions on their own. You want to make sure that that they're getting the conclusions that you are thinking. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, it's really about using evidence, using sources, making sure that you're supporting your argument throughout the whole thing with that evidence. Okay. Isabella, does that make sense, or is there something I'm missing? Okay, great. All right. Well, I'm gonna call it a day there then. Last slide. So thank you again so much for joining. If you have any other questions, you are free to leave them in that chat, and we will answer them the next time we get on. We've got one more student office hour for the year. That's going to be on Thursday, February 9th at 5 p.m. If you want to be reminded of when that's happening, you can click the bell, and you'll get a notification when our next office hour happens. We'd love to see you back again. We'd love to keep answering your questions. At that point, I think most of you will really be done with your projects, but some of you might find out that you're moving on to your district contests. So we're happy to help out again for those of you who are moving on, or those of you who want to get contest ready, or those of you who just want to get your project in a final form to turn into your teacher. That's fine too. Okay. Thanks again for joining. It's been lovely speaking to you, and I'll see you guys next time.